Hey everybody, welcome to episode 9. I have this awesome special guest today. This is Dani. Dani's an SLP and a doctorate of SLP now. And we work together in a clinic in Marion, Indiana. And she was just fantastic to work with as a BCBA and SLP. We crossed paths quite a bit in our career, and the things that we focus on kind of overlap. So Dani, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I am a private practice owner. I'm in my 6th year of being an SLP, which is kind of crazy. 8th year in the field because I was an SLPA prior. I got my doctorate last year, and it's a clinical doctorate, so I'm an SLPD, and I actually studied imposter phenomenon in second-year SLP graduate students and the role of mindfulness, which was really fun. I am currently operating my own private practice, which is fun and crazy and hectic. And it is in Elkhart, Indiana, and it's called Messy Speech and Language Therapy. You can find it at themessyslp.com. And then you can find me on Instagram at themessyslp, where I try to keep up on content, but it's hard nowadays. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you. It's fun to see you.
Yeah, it's great to see you too. We had a great time together working in the clinic. Dani and I have a lot in common. We both are avid. I wouldn't say I'm not a CrossFitter. You were a CrossFitter. Are you still a CrossFitter? Are you still doing that?
No. Okay. I had to back it up. I just lift heavy stuff and hope for the best now.
Same. Yes. Same. Yeah. Yeah. My joints were like, CrossFit's not for you. So now I just lift the heavy stuff and enjoy it from a distance, right? I'm a little jealous of those with better joints than mine, but here we are. So anyway, Dani and I have lots of things that we love to talk about. So super thankful to have you on here. Thanks so much for joining me. Kind of my mission for what I'm doing is really just putting out as much information as possible to anybody in the field of ABA or those with autism, loved ones with autism, caregivers of those with autism, or even people who are autistic themselves, and just looking for more information. So today's focus, let's start with what is an SLP. There might be some people that are unfamiliar with what an SLP does. So we'll start there.
Yeah, so an SLP stands for speech language pathologist. We are often called speech therapists, or you will hear in the schools, we're called speech teachers. So we focus on speech language. We diagnose and treat speech and language or communication disorders. And to be honest, the field of speech language pathology is so wide. We're the people that work with stuttering, speech sound disorders, so kids who have a hard time with their R. We work on functional communication, AAC, which I know we'll get to in a little bit, which is augmentative alternative communication. We can work in, with TBI, traumatic brain injury, and working in that realm. That is not my realm. But there's also the more medically based side of things. So we work with feeding and swallowing disorders as well. So there's a wide range of things that speech language pathology encompasses. So that's a quick, broad overview of what we do.
Yeah, that's great. A typical. Oh no, we have echoing. I wonder if your earbuds disconnected.
They did. How does it sound now?
Sounds better. Can you still hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm echoing.
Oh no.
Hang on, I think I can do echo cancellation.
I can also try this. Nope. How about that?
Let me try it now. I can still hear myself. If we go out of the studio, there's a way to click echo cancellation over on the right-hand side, and then we can just go back into the studio.
Gotcha.
So let's do that real quick.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks for explaining kind of big picture overview of what SLPs do. How often do you typically meet with people, and how long are the sessions when you work with them?
Yeah, it really depends. So right now, through my private practice, I have a contract with a local school district that I'm at 3 days a week. And so I will see, right now I'm at the high school level, so I'll see students really one time a month, oftentimes, or one time per quarter to kind of check in, so more consultation services. So that's something that we can do, is offer those consultation services in the office or in the clinic that I'm at, in my little office space. I see primarily kids one time a week for 30 minutes. It really depends. I have a handful of parents, because I'm private pay only, I don't go through insurance at this time. I have a handful of parents who have said, great, you've recommended 30 minutes, we want an hour, or we want 45 minutes. And that's kind of the nice thing about the private pay world, is we kind of get to be a little bit flexible, but it's typically once a week for 30 minutes, and really following kind of a role release model where I'm not just doing the therapy and then sending the kid, but I'm doing the therapy and I'm educating parents and giving parents, hey, can we work on this, or let's focus on this, and then kind of sending them off, because, you know, the proportion of time that they're with me versus the time that they're with their parents or their teachers or their siblings is so drastically different that I need parents and family members and everybody on my side so that we can really do a great job wrapping around those kids to help facilitate the most success.
Yeah. Do you see a big difference when the parents are involved and are implementing things at home versus the kiddos who kind of go home and then, you know, maybe it's not worked on intensively until they come back and see you the next week?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've really found, and this is obviously some anecdotal stuff, but I found that parents who not only work on some things, but work on it in a manner that's encouraging and honoring of what the kid's already doing, I've really found success. Because what I really hesitate with, and I will give parents things like, take this home and work on this, let's get some repetitions, because as you and I know, when we're outside or we're in our garage lifting weights, right? The best thing that we can do is repetition, repetition, repetition for that motor plan and that motor memory. And so obviously I want the kids to get repetition, but can we do it in a way so that the kid doesn't feel like they're in speech 24/7? Because what we don't want to be doing is correcting the way they talk all the time, or trying to facilitate communication all the time. And then by the time they get to me, they're burnt out and they don't feel like they're being heard. They don't feel like they're being listened to, or every time they do talk, they're being corrected. And so it's really a fine line, I feel like, between taking things home and doing so much that we lose the kid. And so that's been something that's really fun to kind of figure out, is because that's totally different for each kid. But it's so important that parents work on things, but I've really tried to find ways, how can we work on things without the kid feeling like they're working on things all the time?
Yeah. Yeah. Because who wants to work on the thing that is the hardest for them all the time?
Right.
Yeah. Somebody wanted to pick out something that I really struggled with and that was difficult for me, and they just, you know, kind of addressed it consistently every single day, all day, I'd be pretty frustrated. So that makes a lot of sense.
Or you're interrupted and it's like, we'll say that again. And it was like, man, I already said that. Like, I just said that. I just told you. And like, parents are the biggest allies, if you will, when it comes to speech disorders and communication disorders, because we know those kids that point a certain way and the parent goes, no, you can't have that, right? Those chicken nuggets right now. And you're like, what? How did you get that was chicken nuggets, right? Like, parents are our best allies. They know their kid. And so parents are often the best ones to find that balance of honoring their communication while also modeling and providing some, just some really great strategies at home can help with that. Because like I said, our parents can be our best friends when it comes to getting things done in the home.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. Both fields, I would say that's incredibly true. Okay, so we've kind of already talked through what are some things that you can work on as an SLP in general, like big picture. What are things with your population specifically in your area of focus that you work on during your sessions?
So when I opened my practice and I started seeing kids in the office, because I decided, I would say the end of last school year, to transition full-time in my own thing. I thought for sure it would be like after school speech sound kids who just need some help with their R and, you know, or their TH or their S, whatever it is. And then I figured I would have some autistic kids coming in who need some functional communication work. That's what I figured I'd be working on. And surprisingly, I actually have quite a few littles, which is so fun. So I have a handful of under 3 that I totally love working with. So in my office, I work like one session, I'm with a little 20-month-old that we're working on some language. So we're working on expressive or receptive language. So what are we saying? What's the content of what we're saying? And what are we understanding? I work with kids who have, like I said, speech sound disorders. So we're working on some of those, some early language. So, you know, getting kids to say their first words, stuff like that. I also work with AAC, the functional communication piece, getting kids to be able to express their wants and needs. And then I think that covers it. So language and speech primarily, with the functional communication piece built in there.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And you've talked a little bit about like some of the kids that, you know, some of your kiddos are autistic. Some of them have difficulty with like an R or a T or like TH, those kinds of things. Autism being a diagnosis, what are some other diagnoses that you treat specifically?
Specifically, I work with, and this also encompasses kids that I see in the schools. I do see Down syndrome and cerebral palsy. I see ADHD, developmental delays. We said autism. I have a handful of kids and students that I work with that have some rare disorders, you know, and you have to really do some research on that, because when you have those rare genetic disorders, it's very hard to find some research on what is speech going to look like and stuff. So I really have a wide range of kids and diagnoses that I see, it keeps me on my toes.
Yeah, I bet. That's awesome. Okay. So now to kind of pivot to a specific topic that I really wanted to talk about today. And this was brought up. I asked a lot of my like Facebook friends and the autism community that I'm familiar with, like what would be helpful to learn, especially if you could just chat with an SLP, what would be helpful to learn? And there was lots of questions around like method of communication and alternative methods of speaking. So let's first talk through, can you kind of explain what a method of communication is? Even though it sounds like if you break it down, we can kind of assume what it means. But if you could just explain that to us and maybe give us some examples of that, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, so in general, when I'm talking about different methods or different modes, I will use them interchangeably. Different methods or modes of communication, I really encourage people to think about from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed, what are the different ways that they're communicating? And right now, I'm very aware of the fact that I'm using my hands a lot, right? I'm using my hands. I'm using facial expressions, our body language. So we have those nonverbal means of communication. We have, like I said, our gestures, even our hands supplementing our conversation. We have our spoken word. We have text messages, email, Instagram messages. So we have all of these modes of communication or methods of communication, and we use them a lot. And when we have students or individuals, clients, whoever that is having a hard time communicating maybe with their voice, or they don't necessarily have the comfort level, they might not have the motor ability to do so, whatever reason behind why they are not necessarily using their voice, that's when we introduce those alternative modes of communication. So we use so many different modes or methods of communication throughout our day. And even the horn while you're driving can be a method of communication, right? To let the person in front of you know you gotta go. So it's just the way that we can connect with people, be it for the best or for the worst, but we can connect with people through the way that we communicate, through those different modes. You know, somebody might call you and you let the call go to voicemail and then you text them because that's your preferred method of communication with that person. So it's a lot. We communicate in a lot of beautiful ways.
Yeah, that is so true. And it's hard to even think about like all of the different methods that we use, because I think sometimes we take them for granted that we have all of these tools to kind of use from. And even having all those different tools, we still kind of struggle to communicate with one another sometimes and like hit the nail on the head. So I can't imagine how frustrating it would be for some of our kiddos that do not have hardly any methods of communication, especially ones that involve like vocal speech or, something other than gesturing or facial expression or body positioning and body language, that kind of thing.
Right.
So how does an SLP determine kind of the right mode of communication to start supplementing with a kiddo? Obviously, whatever they have, we're going to honor that and we're going to build on top of that. But how do you decide like, oh, maybe we should add in sign language, or maybe we should add in an AAC device or something like that?
Yeah. So we really, we operate under two fundamental beliefs. And the first one is that there are no prerequisites to communication. So the antiquated way to do things, and I say antiquated, and like these were things that we were learning just not too long ago when I was in grad school, right? That we have now evolved and learned. But they're the old school way of doing things, which again isn't really old school, but they have to have joint attention. They have to be able to follow and have eye contact, and they need to be watching, and they need to be able to participate in back and forth play before we can even think about introducing anything in terms of a device. Mm-hmm. And we just know now that that is so not the case. And so there are no prerequisites to communication or to being able to use an AAC device. And the second one is we're presuming competence. And so we're presuming that a child can learn a mode of communication or multiple modes of communication when given the opportunity to do so. So I think with that, it's also, we have to take into account where the child is, what the family goals are for the child, and all of that. But so we operate with those two beliefs. And then from there, it's really honestly trying to figure out what the kid takes to. So like you said, it's honoring their communication. So I have a friend that I see at the office, and this particular little one communicates very well with their body proximity and their smile. I say that their smile is their yes. So if I'm doing something and this child smiles, I know I can continue to do that thing. Mm-hmm. If that child pulls away or doesn't give me a smile, I know that I am going to back way up and give them some space because I am doing something that is not enjoyable. So being able to honor that, right, like you said, honor that communication and then modeling various ways. So I'll kind of make this little one a case study. For this particular child, I came in hot with an AAC device. So I came in hot with a communication system and I was like, perfect, we're rolling with it. And right away it got pushed away and it was like, nope, no way, no how. And so it's been almost a year. And now I'm looking at maybe introducing it back in. And so we really, when we're introducing these different ways of communication, be it sign, be it, working on verbal speech, working on a communication device, pictures to communicate, or a lower text, so something that, I have buttons that kids can use to communicate. When we're looking at that, we really introduce something and we try it out, and the kid kind of dictates whether or not it's going to stick. I am a big believer, and I know SLPs are big believers in a robust system is the way to go. But sometimes kids aren't ready for a robust system, and that doesn't mean they don't have the skills. It doesn't mean any of that. It means that we might need to just slow our roll a little bit, and we can get them to a robust system, but we need to go at their pace. And so I think that's really important. So when we're looking at introducing different things, I'm big on introducing different modes and letting the child pick which mode they want to communicate. And with that, it's modeling. I am constantly modeling speech, right? That never stops when we introduce a device. And then maybe I'm modeling the device, but I'm also going to model sign. And then if I have a kid who signs more, but they say stop on the device, fabulous. I'm not going to make them say more on the device. They have more. We're going to roll with that. Just in the way that you and I can email, text, DM, phone call, whatever. I want to make sure that our kids have multiple opportunities. So we're constantly modeling and, trying to introduce things in a natural context and modeling as they go. A lot of parallel play, a lot of what we call narrating what they're doing, right? Oh, you look mad. I'm going to model mad, right? And trying to give them those words in a natural context.
Yeah, that was a great description. So it's interesting that our focuses and the systems or the way that we implement things are different. But what you were talking about with the kiddo where he's like smiling at you or when he pulls away from you, in ABA, we would call that like assent and then assent withdrawal, where basically he's like, yes, I'm enjoying this. Go ahead and keep going. And then when he withdraws from that. And so you're talking about that from like a speech aspect is like a yes and no. And from like an ABA point of view, we're looking at that as like behavioral cues that yes, no, those kinds of things, like assent basically. So it's cool how our fields overlap as we talk through things. How do you know if a kiddo needs some kind of alternative method? So at what point would you say, like, for one kiddo, he obviously needed some additional support to be able to communicate his needs, but he pushed away the one that you thought was going to be the appropriate one. Sometimes we don't always come in and teach, a second, third, fourth communication system. At what point do you start to teach an additional system, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's really when we see that they're having difficulty communicating their wants and needs. That's right, number one. If a kid is not able to get their wants and needs met, we need to look at introducing different ways that they can do that. And sometimes it really is holding up two choices. And starting there, like, do you want milk or do you want juice? Which this family does really well. Which one do you want? That autonomy behind making decisions, right? So we see wants and needs aren't being, or they're having difficulty communicating their wants and needs, difficulty connecting, difficulty in school, getting things done. They're withdrawing, right? That's something to look at. And usually it's, they don't have a robust system, or they don't have multiple means of communication. So we need to look at supplementing. And there are times, and I'm thinking actually of a kid at the clinic that we used to work at, that the kid had so much language, but we couldn't understand a word that little one was saying. And so that child got a device, because sometimes it is bridging the gap between where the child is and where we're going to work on them to be, right? We didn't stop working on speech, but man, imagine the frustration with trying to say something and get your wants and needs met. And speech was really difficult for this friend. And to help decrease that frustration, decrease, that anxiety probably, we got that child a device and watched this one flourish, because again, the language was there, but the speech wasn't. And so when we're seeing that there's a breakdown in communication, and if there's a way that we can supplement, we really try to. And sometimes it's even not that a child's not speaking, or they don't have the language, or they don't have the speech. Sometimes it's just like when us adults, we get home at the end of the day and we're tired, and something happens and we start to go back and forth with our spouse, and then we just go, right? We get so frustrated. And sometimes our kids who have sensory difficulties, or who might have anxiety or something like that, they might get to a point where communication is not the first thing on their mind when they're getting frustrated. And so those are kids that we see knock over things off of their table, right? Hey, we might supplement with like a break icon so that they can non-verbally show us, I need a break and I need it now, because sometimes communication's hard when we're really overstimulated or we're stressed. So it's really when there's a gap in their communication for whatever reason, we really try to supplement. It doesn't mean that we're giving them this entire communication system, but we're going to supplement what they have and see if we can grow so that they can be this holistic communicator that can communicate and connect with a variety of different people in a variety of different settings.
Yeah. I love that explanation. And I don't know if we're thinking about the same little friend, or even if you were there, when I think about the kiddo that was like specifically LAMP. So I went to a LAMP training, and we finally acquired a LAMP device that we could use. And I remember going in with this kiddo, and like you're saying, lots of language, but articulation was really poor. And even just like putting words together was just very difficult. And it was causing a lot of anxiety. And so I went in, and it was the first time that I'd ever presented LAMP with a child ever. And I just sat down and I went through the protocol of like implementing it with him. And oh my goodness, within like 15 minutes, he was like putting things together. He was like spontaneously labeling things for me. I was like, holy moly, this is incredible. We're actually like having a conversation. And he was so excited. He just picked right up on it. And then he just started like opening up all the pages to see like, what else is in here? What else can I talk about? And it was just a total breakthrough for us when he was like able to actually communicate with me. It was like everything clicked. He was so much happier. And one funny story, he had snowed because it's Indiana and that's what it does all the time. And the day before, our center manager had been out shoveling. And so the next day, kiddo showed up, and it was trying to communicate something to the center manager. And we could not figure out what they were talking about. So went and found the device and pulled up a shovel and went back and asked him where it was. And it was like, we'd never taught him where shovel was on the device. He just was like, where is it? Why aren't you shoveling today? And it was just so cool that like he wanted to talk to him about shoveling, and that without the LAMP device, he wouldn't have been able to do that, you know? And I think a lot of our parents and not just specifically with AAC devices, but when we talk about like PECs or we talk about sign language, I think the fear is from a lot of the parents that we're giving up on vocal speech. I don't know if that's something that you hear a lot, but it's something that I hear a lot, is that like, well, I want him to talk. I'm like, me too. Absolutely. So maybe if you could take some time to kind of talk through like how this is supplementing language and how they're even potentially more likely to talk with this, this addition of another system. Do you see that a lot too, where parents think that we're maybe giving up on speech because we're using another method?
Yeah. And I really try to really hone in on this is supplementary. And we never, just because we have something that's alternative and we might have a device or we might have pictures or we might have whatever, just because we have that doesn't mean that we stop talking. We never stop talking. But on top of that, especially with our voice output devices, right now it's a lot of iPads that have different communication apps on them. So those also have voice output. So not only are they getting a model from me, they're getting a model from the device. They're getting their communication is then being immediately, they push a button and there's communication, right? And then oftentimes, or we should be all the time, honoring that right away. And another story from the Marion Clinic was this one particular friend of ours. The device went home and the child hit spaghetti. And this parent was so floored by the fact that their child picked spaghetti that it like late at night, the parent went and got spaghetti for the child. And I was like, that's amazing. Yeah. And so obviously we can't do that all the time, but with that honoring of communication, we're reinforcing, right? Natural reinforcement. Like when we communicate as, you and I are very capable communicators, right? When we communicate with our spouse something, or we communicate with a coworker something, and we get that natural reinforcement, we get that connection, that is super reinforcing. And we never stop talking to our kids as we're modeling. There are even times where I'm modeling. Yesterday I was in a classroom and I was modeling stop with sign, but also on the device. And I then had a student who was imitating both. And great, we now have two different ways to say stop. And if we get a verbal, awesome. But we have two ways that they are going to tell you that they don't want you to do what you're doing. And that's awesome. And so it's, as I can't imagine what it's like as a parent to want your child to talk and they are not. But I really try and encourage parents and tell them that this is a way for them to connect. And we're not giving up on speech. We're really bridging the gap. And it's true, speech might be difficult for them from here on out. This is not to say that they will or won't talk as time progresses. But this is a way for them to communicate and to connect. And I think usually once parents see, usually we have parents on board because they do see that their child's able to request spaghetti, right? And say, I want spaghetti and I want it now. Or they're able to say, I love you, when they otherwise wouldn't be able to. So I really, oftentimes it's showing parents, can you give me some time to just show you that your child is able to connect through this? And then usually that's when parents are pretty on board. But I don't doubt that there's not some grief that happens with that. And so it's trying to also ensure that we go at parents' pace as well. We go at the child's pace, but also making sure that parents know that if they choose not to go this route, this isn't like all or nothing. You have to get a device or we don't do anything. So I think that's also important too, that we don't have agendas as professionals. We really, as long as what we're doing is aligning with the family, we're serving the child well, and it's our job to give recommendations, but we never do things that parents aren't comfortable with. And so I think that's something that we have to make sure that we're doing as professionals, is making sure that we understand this has to be difficult for parents, but it can be beneficial for our kids for sure.
Yeah. I think, some of the barriers with the AAC device is like, it needs to be charged all the time. It's big and clunky and we have to take it everywhere. One of the other things that I've seen too is like, if the device could be exited out of the AAC, like the program, if it's not a dedicated device, like let's say it's an iPad, for example, and your kiddo knows that there's other things to do on that iPad, then every time that you present the device, that's all they want to do. So do you have tips on like, if they have like an AAC device or they're using an iPad for a specific program, should they lock it into that and not allow their kiddo to have it for other things? Or is there anything that you can talk about in regards to that, in regard to that?
We really, and I say we, because I'm on the assistive tech team at the district that I work with. And one of the things that we have to talk about is kids have student iPads and then they have communication iPads. And sometimes that's a lot of devices to have, right? 2 iPads that a kid has to carry and tote around. However, the research shows that a dedicated device is very important, especially if the device is an iPad, because there are so many cool things on the iPad and our kids love iPads. And so one of the things that we have available that I think is really important is the iPad is put in guided access. Now, hilariously, I had a kid at the clinic when I was working with you guys that showed me that if the iPad dies, guided access is exited out and it restarts out of guided access. And I remember for a few weeks we were stumped going, how is this child? We had it password locked, we had everything. And so guided access is limited in that regard. And it's really easy to put an iPad in guided access. The other thing is you're going through insurance to get a device. Usually the company it's quite the
nightmares.
Yes, quite the process. But usually the devices have to be durable medical equipment, the DME. And with that, companies should have the option to put it in what's called single app mode. Now, obviously, that makes it difficult if you're wanting to add like real life pictures, so that all of the staff that's working with that kid, they have real life pictures of the staff. You usually have to go through the company and call them and say, can you unlock this iPad? You have to sign why you're unlocking it, all of that. But it's worth it to know that once this kid gets this iPad, this is the only app they are able to ever access. And so that can be really, really helpful. So single app mode, guided access, and there are also options for things that are not iPad or iOS based that are a little bit thicker and clunkier, but that don't have the opportunity to go to all the other fun apps. So
yeah, that's one that we see quite a bit. It's like a kiddo gets on there one time and gets out of the program, that the app that we were using, and now that's all that they want to do. There's YouTube on this thing, so forget you. I'm just going to use it to watch my YouTube over and over and over again. So that's something we've had to navigate for sure. Insurance is the other one, because obviously like having an AAC device is kind of like the holy grail outside of vocal speech, right? Like we obviously want vocal speech, but if we can't have that, we really want an AAC device because everything is just there. Like for me to be able to make so many icons for this kid that I would have never known that shovel should have been one. So for me to like pre-think through all the different, pecs or signs that everyone would need to know for this child. Whereas if you have an AAC device that has like a catalog already loaded into it, then it's all there for them to just go through and see what they're looking for. I'm sure spaghetti is the same. I don't know if that's one of the 5 to 10 foods that this kiddo typically eats, but if they wouldn't have had the spaghetti peck, or if not everybody or icon, or not everybody knew the sign for spaghetti and he didn't either, then we wouldn't have known that that's what he wanted to eat. Exactly. The other thing that I like about the devices too is that every single time they hit it, it reads it off. And so they're getting that immediate constant feedback that this picture is this word. And it supplements us in ways that we cannot possibly compete with, because every time they're pressing at that picture, that icon, they're getting that immediate feedback. And as much as we try to do that with sign and play and everything else, we're human. And so we miss all the opportunities, but that device does it every single time. And so I wish it was just easier to get these devices to our kiddos. It's such a barrier.
I know. It's such a barrier, and it's gotten easier, I will say. Like, it used to be this huge daunting process, and it's still not by any means as simple as I would love for it to be. And then you run into, if something happens, you have a 5-year kind of window where if the device is no longer appropriate for whatever reason, right, we hope that doesn't happen, but you have to wait 5 years for insurance to cover it again. And so you're kind of in trouble in that regard. And there are some companies out there that do offer something smaller for like our littles, right? That might have a hard time toting around a big iPad. And then as the kid grows, they do offer within that 5 years, hey, we'll swap out and we'll give you a regular iPad whenever the child's ready. Or, hey, you found that a different app was appropriate. Let's swap that on there. And so I think there are there are not insurance companies, there are AAC companies that are making it a lot easier and more accessible. And I think having the apps has made AAC so much more accessible, because if we do get a denial or something like that and a parent has an iPad, hey, you know, I don't want to tell you that you need to put this on your iPad, because I will never tell parents that they have to purchase something for their child to make progress by any means.
Right.
But I had a family that I saw privately. In fact, this little one just graduated. They were my very first client in my private practice, and they just graduated. And the family said, you know what, we don't want to go through insurance because we don't know if our child is going to need this for the rest of their lives. So we would like to buy the app. And then they rented an iPad, or they found a refurbished iPad, and they opted to do it that way. And it was like, great, awesome. So, you know, presenting parents with, okay, you can go the insurance route. You can purchase it on your own, or we can work around it, and it is okay. Like, we'll find a way around it. And so, but insurance does make it difficult for sure.
They do. And it seems like, maybe now that you've worked in kind of both settings, you can give some insight on this, but it seems like it's easier to get an AAC device through the school than it is through insurance. Have you seen that play out?
Yes. Yeah. So that's one of the barriers that we're finding as the assistive tech team is we are very fortunate with the assistive tech team, where we have administration that's behind us saying, do what you have to do, and we will fund it, which is really, really nice, because when we first started, this is my 4th year working with this district. So when I first started, my 2nd year, I got asked to be on the assistive tech team, and we had one app and we had limited iPads. And it was like, man, we need many apps and we need tons of iPads. And so we have grown our inventory, but now working in the high school, we really need to look at, well, when this child gets done and leaves our school system, what happens to their device? And so we are still really encouraging, and as we are encouraging, we're reminding ourselves that we still probably need to go through insurance and get them a device. So it's easier to get a kid a trial, because we still abide by the 6-week trial in the schools. We'll say, hey, you have a 6-week trial, and we'll check in with you at the end of 6 weeks and see if you still feel like this is being beneficial, if you don't have enough data and you want more, if you want a different app. So we don't require, unless we're really low on iPads, which we're really not right now, we don't require teachers to turn it in after 6 weeks, you're done. And a lot of the companies, 6 to 10 weeks, they're like, hey, we need it back. They're a lot more lenient now, but we can be a little more lenient, where I do have a handful of kids who have been on a device for 3 or 4 years, and I have not gotten to getting them an insurance device yet. But so it's kind of, yes, we can get them on a trial quicker, but we still end up wanting to pursue the insurance route just so that they have something when they're done with our school.
Yeah, for sure. And it's difficult too when we're like in center, because then it's like we're trying to share a device with multiple kiddos. And if this is the main method of communication that they're successful with, it becomes really difficult. So we can't have, 20 iPads as much as we'd love to. There's just a lot that goes into that, and HIPAA compliance and everything else. And so it just becomes really challenging. So we often look to low tech, which is not bad. It's just, man, once you've worked with an AAC device with a kiddo and they really start to make a lot of progress, and then they can't have it and take it home, it's just heartbreaking. Like, I just want you to be able to take all this language home with you and use it at home with your family too. So it just gets tricky. Kind of like a little bit off course here, but in language development, do children with autism develop language differently than those with other diagnoses? So I wonder if you see like a certain trend with like, okay, this child has autism, and so this is pretty typical for them. And how does that kind of vary from maybe some of the other kids that you work with?
So I will say that one of the main things that we look at and that we're learning about, and this is not my area of expertise, but it's something that I'm learning about, is our Gestalt language processors. So we have the analytic language processors, which is probably you and I, right? We learned single word units. We learned mama and dada and everything like that. And then we built it up into larger units in sentences and conversation like we're having now. But our Gestalt language learners are our kids that sing a lot of songs, or they'll be the ones that we teach them I want, and they go, I want open door all the time for everything, right? And so they learn these chunks. And so again, this is an area that when I was in grad school, we didn't learn too much about. It was if they're echolalic, you have to squash it. Well, now we're learning that their echolalia is their communication, and we need to work on it. And we need to target it.
Love
and
that.
We need to encourage it, right? And so learning those big units. And so while that's not a trend necessarily, it's definitely something that's on my radar. If I do have an autistic kid come into the office, is, hey, I need to help or try to figure out, are they a Gestalt language processor, or are they an analytic? But I guess that's with all my kids, because you can be a Gestalt language processor and not have autism. But one of the things is I really try with all of my kids to do child-led all day, every day. And we're going to be focusing on connection over compliance all day, every day. But with my autistic kids, I will say it's really, I need to be extra on top of honoring communication always. Because I just find that that's so important with that rapport and that connection piece, that it's not, I don't know, I just find that specifically with that population, it means so much when I'm able to honor their proximity or honor what they're doing. But in terms of language development, they just, I mean, all of our kids, though, autistic or not, just go at their own pace, and they pick up on things that you're like, that's what you picked up on? Like, I was not modeling that. And you, like, I have a kid that picked up on stuck, and I was like, I mean, I modeled it, but I didn't, we were also working on car and go, and you picked up on stuck.
Stuck it is. All right.
Take it. And so I think it's so hard to speak on the trends, because it's really it's so much on a kid by kid basis. And really, you know, I will say one of the things in language development across the board is you have what I feel like you'll have this peak, and then it feels like you have a plateau or a maintenance, and then you have this peak. But I just feel like my autistic clients are really big. I think multimodal communication is really is beneficial, just modeling various things. And I really think we really have to cater to their love language and make sure that we're doing things that really speak to them and connect with them. And I think that's been the number one thing that I've seen when we're working on language, is it needs to be impactful, and it needs to be something that matters to them. And I think that makes it really special. And it can be difficult just to find what it is that they do love. But so I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah. No, that was great. And I think you're right. It's interesting that like we focus on like go, we focus on car, and then they like attach to this like stuck or something like that. Yeah. It's the same way as like my kids, like they might hear somebody else having a conversation, and they hear like one naughty word. And so that's like the one word that they are associating with. And that's, I'm like, out of all the things that's going on in this other conversation, that's the part you had to hear. Right. And I think they're like drawn to like certain words that, you know, maybe express heightened emotion or things like that. So like stuck is like frustration, right. You know, like, oh, that one, I'm going to need that one later on. You know, I'm going to hold on to stuck because I feel that sometimes. Yeah. That's the one. Or, you know, the kiddos who have very few words, but then they have like 4-letter words that they can use, you know, in context, very, very reliably across multiple settings, you know.
Listen, in context, I'm like, hey, you use that in context. I'm like, but not now. Because I'm like, yes, appropriate context. Love it.
I know. I'm like, you seem frustrated. I can see that. Thanks for telling me.
Exactly.
That's great. Okay. I'm trying to think of anything else. I mean, I'm sure that there's so many more things that we can talk about, but is there anything in this like arena of, you know, modes of communication or AAC devices or anything that I didn't ask today that you wish I would have asked, or something else that could just be said about it?
I think the one thing that popped into my head as you were talking about how we work on go and we work on more, and then the kids will get on Stuck, or they'll get on their favorite movie or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
I listened to, as I was transitioning into the high school, I was like, holy smokes, I know how to work with our little friends who, we're learning first words and we're learning stuff like that, and now to be with high schoolers. So I took a course on vocabulary selection with high school kids who are using alternative devices. And the interesting thing, so usually we introduce what are called core words, which are super highly they can generalize really easily in a bunch of different contexts. We can make it happen real quick. So like go is one of my favorites because we can do go in literally everything. So a kid who likes to be tickled, they hit go and we go, 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 go. And we tickle them and they're like, woo, or we can run around and they hit go and we go running, like whatever it is, right? Go is a big impact word. But what this person said, and I've tried to adopt it as much as possible, even though sometimes it can be hard, is we have core and fringe vocabulary. So core vocabulary are those they are in a bunch of different contexts and they work in a bunch of different things. More, stop, no, go, help, right? We can use those in a lot of different contexts for a lot of different things. But then we have our fringe vocabulary, which is our supplementary, right? So that might be art supplies, that's sports, it's weather, right? All these things that we can use in a handful of situations, but not everything. And what this person said is we become so core focused sometimes that we forget that sometimes fringe vocabulary can be core vocabulary for a kid. Mm-hmm. And I think that's so important. Like if I have a kid who loves brown bear, we are going to be putting that on the device and we are going to be saying that often. Or it might be that they love a song and they stim on a song and we're going to put that song on their device so that they can listen to that song whenever they want. And so I think that's like the main, because when we get a kid an AAC device, part of my job and our job is vocabulary selection, right? And we really, sometimes kids can go on a robust system with everything opened up and they rock and roll. Sometimes we have to teach kids, what does a device do and how can we, implement this? And more often than not, I go, let's open everything up. But sometimes we introduce vocabulary a little bit slower to go at the kid's pace a little bit more. And with that, can we also introduce those fringe vocabulary? Because that's that love language, right? And so looking at vocabulary selection and involving parents in that and involving the kid as much as we can to find those things that really speak their language is so important. So I encourage professionals who are looking at vocabulary selection to step outside of our core box and look at things that are really impactful, like spaghetti. Like, let's open up all the foods so that we can teach that kid what those foods are, or that food is not available, and not taking away, if an iPad's highly motivating and the kid is just clicking iPad, we don't take that vocabulary word away. We acknowledge it and we move on and we try to get you to talk about something else. And so I think vocabulary selection is really important and it needs to be a team effort.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you brought that up. I've heard that quite a bit too, even from, RBTs that I've worked with or whoever. They're like, Mom didn't send in the cookies today. So I went ahead and took the PEX icon off for cookies and I put it in my pocket. And I was like, nope, put it back. Mm-hmm. It would be like somebody coming into our head and like taking out a word where we're not even able to communicate about it. And so I see you shaking your head. I'm going to stop talking and let you kind of maybe speak to that a little bit about how impactful that is when we like take a word away from a kiddo and don't even allow them to use it.
Yeah, it's so important that we don't do that, because then we're not addressing why the kid is upset about whatever it is, right? And we're not teaching them to overcome being upset about something, because we don't tell our kids, our neurotypical kids, right, or our kids who can effectively communicate verbally, we don't tell them like, oh, you can't say that word, you cannot ask me for cookies. And we don't, like you said, deny the ability to communicate that. If a kid is asking for cookies, we're going to say, hey, we don't have those available right now. Mom forgot to bring them. And that's a huge part of honoring the communication, is because, and I did this initially when I was like, we need to honor every single thing. It was like, well, then honoring doesn't mean giving them every single thing. So while I'm super appreciative that mother went and drove and got their child spaghetti, we don't have to do that. Honoring is, I would love to ask my husband for this, $100,000 car. And he's going to look at me and say, no, honey, you can't get that, right? Like, we have to have, part of communication is being told no. And so if we're taking things away from our kids, one, so frustrating and definitely a violation of that child's rights. Like I have learned as a professional to just be blunt about that. Like, it is not our job to tell a child what they can or can't communicate. And two, we're not teaching them to overcome the frustration of the word no. And we're not allowing them to be frustrated with the word no.
Right.
It's part of our lives. And if a child gets frustrated with no and they knock over a water bottle and they flip the table, by golly, I mean, we all want to do it sometimes, right? Like, we just teach them, then, hey, you know what? You knocked over your water bottle and you knocked over the table, and that was not really safe for you, but we understand you were mad. And so then by telling that child, or by allowing that child to be put in that, or not put in that position, because we don't want to ever put our kids in a position where they're upset, right? But allowing them the autonomy to ask for cookies, let's say, at least, cookies aren't available right now. We can then teach them, you look like you're mad. I'm so sorry you're mad. And then we can teach them to identify those emotions. And we're not giving them that opportunity if we're just taking things away from them. And so I love that you told them, no, you put that icon back. Like, that needs to be available to them. And that's, again, it really comes down to, we have a communication bill of rights. And I really encourage everybody to look at the communication bill of rights and like, is it violating that? And if it is, don't do it. Because it's that child's autonomy and communication and connection to the world and the people around them.
Yeah, absolutely. We've even done some things of like, okay, if they're out of things, like, don't take it out of the book, but put it on the red page. And that just lets them know, like, hey, these things are unavailable right now. You're more than welcome to ask for them. But I think you're right. And I think it's a really good opportunity when their emotions are really strong about something. It is a great teaching opportunity. Like, let's take the opportunity to pull mom down on the icon and say, oh, mom forgot, or it's all gone. We don't want to blame it on mom, of course, but we could pull down the icon for it's all gone, cookies all gone. And then like a sad face. I know, it's so sad. I wish you had cookies too. But like, that's a great opportunity for us to build some language and to, help them understand, like, yes, we totally understand that you're frustrated about this. It is very sad. I'm sorry. And then we put, tomorrow ? Like, maybe it'll be here tomorrow. We'll ask mom, that kind of thing.
That's so good. And then teaching the kid to ask mom for cookies. Like, mom comes to pick the child up. We wanted cookies. Where were our cookies? And we as an adult could be modeling like cookies. Where were they? And then mom brings them tomorrow, right? And like, there's so many beautiful language things that can happen. And also we can help teach our kids how to regulate themselves, or how to find something that will help regulate them when they're mad, because like, life isn't as nice as we would like it to be. We all have to be, things aren't always available. And so giving them that language so that they can ask for something that they want, is really important, but also allowing them to, or helping them identify those feelings is so huge. And it's really difficult, because teaching a child mad can be really hard. Like, it looks like you're mad. I had a kid that was at the center that he would flop on the floor. And so next to him on the floor, I would lay down and go, I'm mad. Like, I'm so mad, and shake my fist. And then hilariously, every time that kid saw me, they would say, I'm mad. And it was like,
that's what you want.
Yeah. But trying to teach them in the moment is so important.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And it's like, if you're trying to teach these things that are like, teaching emotions is really difficult, because it's a private event, right? It's something that we can see the signs of, but it's really hard to actually identify. Like, you feel this way. We're kind of just guessing how you feel. You could be mad. You could be frustrated, So those are really difficult to teach outside of the actual situation. Like, I can have you match emojis of like, this is a happy face to a happy face. I can have you do those things. Yeah. That way you can kind of start to discriminate the different features of a smile and associating it with happy. But really, like, in the moment when they're feeling that emotion is really the best time to add some language to that and start associating those things.
Yeah. And modeling and not requiring to communicate when kids are at that level.
Yep. Absolutely.
I know I love my husband more than anyone on this planet. there are times that I'm overstimulated at home, and he'll try to be the wonderful, fabulous human he is. And I can't, I'm overstimulated to a point where I'm like, I can't have this conversation right now, right? I'm trying to get dinner out and all of that. We all get to that point, and that's not a point where I'm ready to learn and have this conversation. And so understanding that just modeling is so impactful. I think modeling, we don't have to require communication. That's not what it's about. We don't require that of our kids as they're developing typically, right? We don't require that they say mama. What are we doing while we're, changing their diaper? We're going mama, and we're modeling. We're not going, say mama, and trying to move their lips, right? We don't do that. And so following the same kind of, we don't need to require our kids to say something on a device for it to be impactful. If they're upset, right, and they're not feeling, or even when they're feeling happy, we're modeling happy, I'm happy, it looks like you're happy, and trying to model for them. I think parents especially trying to know, or trying to get them to understand how impactful their modeling is, that it does matter. And we don't have to require something, especially when a kid is in a position where they might not be in a good space to learn right now, which we all get to that spot.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that. And I think historically that was something where ABA, even though having the best intentions, we would require a certain response in the moment of escalation, because we just wanted that thing to be taught in the moment. And so we would require some kind of I'm going to call it spontaneous, even though it wasn't spontaneous, language to occur. And we're like, just ask for this and then you can have it. Right. And I'm so glad that our field is moving away from that, and that we're really partnering with the child and saying I understand now is not the time for that. You are far from a place of being able to learn right now. Let me help you. I think this is what you're wanting. I'm going to model it for you, and then let's go get it and get you kind of back to a place where you are ready to learn again. Right. Because life's frustrating enough if you can't even communicate what you are wanting and needing,
Right. And we're just piling onto that frustration. And I've told parents, if I ever have a child that my presence or me being there is causing frustration, I pull back, because the last thing that I want is to jeopardize the connection with the child. That is the goal across everything, is my connection with that child. And I don't always do it well. There are times where the kid starts throwing things. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. I pushed you too far today. I'm going to pull back, right? And trying to really highlight the importance of that connection, because if we don't have that, we've all communicated with people that we don't have a connection with, and it can be weird and it can be forced. And, we talk about small talk where you're like, oh, just get me out of this, right? And making sure that we have that connection with the kids that we work with. And part of that is seeing them in that frustrated moment and going, you know what, it looks like you want this. Let's go see if this helps. Right. And so I think it's a fine line between teaching but I really think our connection has to be the priority over everything. And teaching in a natural language context, that they want, I had a friend at the office the other day that they chew on a sock, and they threw their sock. And the mom goes and started crying. And I was like, oh no, I did something. And then the mom was like, no, they just need a new sock. The sock was too wet. And I was like, oh, perfect. That is probably not the time for me to go, do you want your sock? Tell me sock, right? That's probably not a great time to require something of that child.
Right. Right.
Oh, you want more, or you need help, right? I might model something in that context. And then we just move on. We get the child their new sock and we roll forward. So I think it's really important to remember that one trial is not going to be, the
yes. Yeah. Yeah. And the one trial mentality, this is the one that if I don't get this one trial in, and I think it's because I certainly think it comes from a place of we want the best. We want to make progress. But I think we lose sight of, I like that you said that one trial, because that's a lot of times what I end up saying, even with other BCBAs, do we really think that following through and making sure that this one trial occurs, regardless of how aversive it ends up being in the end, is going to be the one trial that teaches this child? If anything, now moving forward, this is the one trial that they're going to remember was super aversive moving forward. They're going to, every time then, if you would have made her or this child, whoever it is, ask for sock, they're going to remember the time that Dani made her ask for sock when she was really, really irritated. And so it's going to could have a negative connotation moving forward.
Yeah. And we, by learning from autistic adults, right, we know that those things can cause trauma, and we don't, I know that none of us get into the fields that we're in to cause trauma to kids. And so it could be something as simple as I am too close. And if I'm too close and that child is showing me that their shoulders are up and they're like really not comfortable, I'm going to back up, because in no way do I want to cause that child stress. Now, sometimes kids come in and their routine is off or their sleep is off, and sometimes we are not the source of stress, but by golly, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that I am not that, for sure, because we don't want to cause these kids trauma by any means. We want to make sure that we have that. We need to be looking at what is the impact, like you said, what is the impact of me trying to push this one trial? Is this going to help, or is this going to hinder? Because more often than not, it's hindering, and it puts us in a position where we're not a positive and safe person for that kid. And that's really not a good space for us as professionals to be.
Right. And do we really want to be the person that they associate with working on the hardest things and having limited success on the hardest things? Right. And we really are focusing on the things that are the hardest for them. Like, is that child going to be happy and ready and willing to come work with me? Probably not. They're probably going to start tantruming right there as soon as they see me, because now I'm paired with aversive things. But on the other side of that, if I'm like praising them for all these things that they're doing well, and we do all of their favorite activities like tickling and, doing all these fun things, and they get our undivided attention, suddenly we've created this really great context for learning, right? Mm-hmm. Now they're engaged with us. We've got that joint attention that we now know is not a prereq, but man, it's great when you have it. They're, we've got really deep connection together. They're engaged and they're relaxed. And now we're ready to learn. We've created this like really safe place to be able to learn.
Yeah. And I think with my office, that was my main priority, is coming from the schools and sitting down at a table and working with 3 to 5 kids on 3 to 10 different things. It was a lot. And so when I stepped into this office space, I was like, hey, this needs to be a place that, 1, I'm excited to come into, and 2, my kids are excited to come into. And we play, like we straight up play, from my youngest to my oldest client. We play. And even the older kid that we're working on some basic speech sounds, we're going to play. Like, I don't have the table and chairs that are in there are from the OT that comes in for 2 clients a week. And that's in the corner. And rarely do we use the table and chairs. Instead, we're going to be crashing on the crash pad and rolling on the ball and jumping in the ball pit, because that's the stuff, that's where the good stuff happens, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. I started to get this reputation when I would like walk into a consult in these rooms, and like the kids would run up and play with me. And I was like, yes, let's play. We're going to run all the trials. We're going to get so much like language built right now. And the RBTs would be like, it's math time. Like, we've got to get stuff done. And I'm like, it can wait. Like we're engaged right now. Like, we're getting language that we've never had before. Kiddos happy. And I really feel like it's a lot more intense, and man, it's a lot sweatier too. But it's so worth it. We learn so much more when they're like happy and just having a good time, and they're going to remember those things. And often when you like walk into the room, just like that kid said, mad, they're like already thinking of those words that they used with you last time to get you to do the same thing. So if it was go, if it was tickle, if it was mad, they're like, oh, she's fun. They do fun things with me. And I remember those words immediately when you walk in the room, and it's great.
Yep. And I think it didn't end up being a marketing, or I didn't set out for it to be a marketing thing for the clinic, but the best thing that I've done is I've said, just bring your child in for a free consultation. And by that, I mean, like, bring your child into play, and I'll show you that this is a really cool space, and we're going to connect. And I had one parent say that they left because free consultation, you're not paying, you're relaxed. I'm having a great time because I just get to play with your child, right? And show you what it can be like. And then I had one parent say that their child afterwards was like, are we going to go play with Dr. Dani? And so right away, like, I have that connection with that kid. So then by the 3rd time, so I do the consultation, the eval, and then by the time we're actually doing therapy, we have had them there 3 times. They've had 3 positive experiences. And so sometimes we get so big on, I have to build rapport. I have to get started with therapy because we have to, we have insurance to bill, or we have minutes to meet for the IEP. But like, it's so worth it to lay that groundwork and be the fun, connected person with them. Because like, I think I have said this before to parents, and I know other SLPs have said similar things, that I can get your child to comply with communication quite quickly. I will get them to connect lifelong with the way that I'm doing things. I don't want compliance. I want lifelong connection and communication. And that's what we're about, right? If we go the compliance route, sure, we might get really fast results, but are they generalizing those results? Are they connecting? That's why we really have to prioritize that connection and forego the quick, like, we have to get data now, for the, you know what, we have to connect now. And you need to see that I'm a safe person and that I'm a fun person, and we can have a great time. These first 3 to 10 sessions, however many it takes, I'm going to forego, going the traditional route so that I can make sure that I connect with you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think kind of what we were talking about before, like core versus fringe, I think too, when we build that connection first, we learn what the core words for this child might be. And it might be every single Thomas the Train engine, and their name and their color and their number. I might need to learn about all of those things before the next session. And then they come in and I've got them all loaded up and we're ready to go. And then those might be core words for this kiddo, right? Like those might be the words that we need to work on first, so that they can talk to me about them. And then we start there and we start, oh, are they going fast? Look at them go. And then we start to bring it kind of back around.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I think you and I could probably just continue going on down this road for a long time. I told you an hour and we're like an hour, 11 minutes in. So I think we'll go ahead and stop there for today. And maybe we'll come up with another topic for part 2 of our conversation. Thank you so much for hopping on today. It's been great chatting with you again, especially thinking back of our like mutual kiddos and just experiences. And I'll be sure to share out your contact information so that people can find you too. Thanks so much, Dr. Dani. It was great talking to you again. Yeah, I'll see you later. Bye.